How's it going? I'm Jumpy, and now we're continuing on to Saw 6. This one was directed by Kevin Greutert, who previously worked as an editor on all the previous films in the series. Saw 6 also has the same writing duo as Saw 4 and 5. It begins with a test. Two predatory loan sharks named Simone and Eddie wake up on opposite sides of a room, separated by a cage in the middle, each with devices on their heads that will pierce their temples. They have 60 seconds to cut off pieces of themselves using knives and cleavers and slide it down a chute to a scale. At the end of the time limit, whoever's offering weighs the most gets to live, and the loser dies. My man Eddie has obviously seen the movie 7 at some point, and he thinks he can do better than the greed victim. He immediately goes to town, cutting huge chunks of flesh from the side of his stomach. It's ridiculous, and it made me laugh. Simone cuts off her left arm, throws it in, and wins. After the title card, we briefly see Amanda driving a car with Cecil in the passenger seat. Next, we continue where the last movie left off. Hoffman's box slides out of the room after Strom got crushed. He gets out and pushes a button to retract the walls in the crushing room. He goes back to the room and sees something that makes him smile. Then there's an establishing shot of the Umbrella Health Insurance Company building. Alright, you can tell me that the name Eric Matthews is a coincidence and not a Boy Meets World or even a miscongeniality reference. But there's no way anyone can call their insurance company Umbrella Health and not have it be a nod to the Umbrella Corporation, the pharmaceutical company that's behind the zombie outbreak in the Resident Evil series. Saw-dent Evil. And who can forget? The first RE video game lets you pick between two characters. There's Jill Valentine and Chris Red filed for a divorce yet, Lynn? Inside the evil Umbrella Health building in Saw 6, we meet William Birkin in his office. His official title is the Senior Vice President of Membership and Claims. He talks to someone he loves on the phone, and he tells them that he's busy and can't make their birthday dinner that night. Alright, I'm kidding about his last name. William Birkin is an Umbrella scientist from Resident Evil 2. The Saw 6 character is actually named William Easton. I want his family name to be Birkin so bad, but I can compromise and combine the two names and call him William Beastkin. Also in the room is Debbie, who's a lawyer for the company. After his phone call, she asks him if he wants to prep his deposition. The reason for this preposition is that William canceled the policy of a man named Harold Abbott. There's a flashback to Harold trying to appeal the termination. Harold has had an umbrella policy for a decade and now has heart disease. William argues that Harold lied about a pre-existing condition when he filled out his application, because he didn't mention an oral surgery from 30 years ago. And it's a big stretch to say this led to Harold's current problems. Harold pleads that he has a family and says that William just gave him a death sentence, because no one will insure him now that he has heart disease. This is a really well done scene, and you really feel for Harold and dislike William. Back in the present, William tries to justify his awful behavior by saying that the company does good things like helping out clinics. On TV, the blonde reporter woman from the last movie, whose name we find out is Pamela Jenkins, is talking about Jigsaw. Also introduced in this scene is Addie, who's William's secretary, Alan, the file clerk, Hank, the custodian, and a group of 6 people that are collectively called the Dog Pit. They help William dig up anything they can to deny customers' insurance claims. The Dog Pit is his work family, so that means William really is a beastkin. Meanwhile, Hoffman gets called into the crime scene from the movie's opening. Special Agent Erickson is there because they found Strom's fingerprints. Erickson takes Hoffman to another room to show him something. It's Lindsay Perez. She's alive. That comical amount of blood on her pillow in the last movie was just a ruse. Erickson wanted to ensure Perez's safety because he didn't know who Jigsaw's other accomplice was, so they faked her death. I didn't want her to die, so I'm glad she's back. Everything's going according to Hoffman's plans. Strom and Perez originally investigated the fire that killed 8 people. Perez and Erickson believe that Strom put the 5 people responsible for it through a series of tests in the last movie as revenge, because none of them were prosecuted for their involvement. Now they want to work with Hoffman to find Strom. Afterwards, at the hospital, Hoffman runs into PJ herself, Pamela Jenkins. She wants the chance to talk to Jill. Hoffman then speaks to Simone and evilly taunts her. At her home, Jill Tuck looks through the box that John left her. It contains clasp envelopes that are numbered 1 through 6, as well as another bubble mailer package. She gets a call from Pamela Jenkins, and Jill pulls a photo of PJ out of one of the clasp envelopes. Erickson, Perez, and Hoffman go to the morgue. Dr. Hefner noticed that the jigsaw piece cut out of Eddie's body was done with a different knife than what John usually uses, and that it's the same kind of knife that was used to cut a piece out of Seth Baxter, the pendulum trap guy. Since the jigsaw tape disappeared from Eddie and Simone's trap, Erickson and Perez decide to take a closer look at Seth Baxter's tape to see if it's someone else's voice on the tape. It's so satisfying watching Hoffman squirm here. Later on at the clinic, Hoffman meets Jill and tells her that the game is going down that night. He demands the envelopes. She gets them, and he opens up the number 1 envelope. Inside is a picture of William, and then he Jill tucks it back into the envelope and leaves. Back at his office on that rainy night, William Easton, I'll go back to calling him that for now, here's a news report that says that anyone related to John Kramer could be targeted. Now that he knows he's next, he's scared. The electricity goes out. William looks out at a frosted glass wall and sees a silhouette with a gun approaching. He grabs a gun of his own. The person enters the room with a flashlight, and William shoots them, revealing that they're just a security guard. Then someone in a pig mask pops up behind William and stabs him with a syringe. William Easton wakes up in a dark room wearing an oxygen mask and in a contraption that looks like a giant vice around his sides. The right side of his shirt is already bloodied. A TV starts playing a tape that features John himself. He greets William, and William's response is, "Oh geez." I know he has profanity in his vocabulary from when he shot the security guard, but this feels very human. Sometimes you'll just blurt out a more family-friendly "oh geez" without even thinking about it, and it's a very funny moment. John knows William personally and doesn't like what William does at Umbrella Health. William is also wearing 4 smaller devices, one on each of his limbs, that will blow up if time runs out. He has an hour to finish 4 tests, and clearing each one results in him getting to remove one of the devices. John tells William that his actions have resulted in families losing their loved ones, and that he won't see his family again if he doesn't complete the tests in time. By the time Saw 6 rolled around, I completely avoided reading any information about the movie's plot beforehand. So when I got to see this in a movie theater for the first time, I was very surprised that it was tackling the timely issue of healthcare and health insurance in the US. There's nothing too deep, and the movie isn't subtle in its critiques, but it doesn't need to be. I think it's cool that they did it at all, and I genuinely like how they integrated it into the Saw storyline in a natural way. And yes, we're going back to Saw 3 and 4 territory, following one person going through a series of tests with a time limit. It was 2 hours in Saw 3, 90 minutes in Saw 4, and we're continuing the trend of cutting 30 minutes again here in Saw 6 with William getting an hour. If this keeps up, I'm gonna feel sorry for the person 2 movies from now when they have 0 minutes and are just killed by the trap immediately when their tape ends. The first test is that William O'Geeston has to compete against the custodian, Hank. Each time they take a breath, the torture device will get tighter until it kills them. Whoever lasts the longest wins. Right off the breath, this is an intense scene, and it's harder to watch because Hank is just some guy doing his job. He's employed with other people who do some really shitty things, and he's not doing them himself. Not everyone can be picky with who they work for. Unfortunately, Hank is a smoker and can't hold his breath as long, and he dies. William gets out and he checks his right side under his bloodied shirt. He sees a cut that's been stitched up. He then finds a key that removes the bomb that was attached to his right arm. The movie's already cut to a woman, Tara, and her son Brent in a cage. They can see William on a monitor, but now they notice a switch with 2 choices: live and die. It's connected to some hydrofluoric acid. Tara tells Brent that their reason for being there is because of his father, and the movie cuts to William. There's a flashback of Pamela going to Jill's apartment. She gives Jill a note that was found at the Gideon meatpacking plant. When she walks away, Pamela is kidnapped by someone in a pig mask. Well, PJ is now in another cell like Tara and Brent's. Hoffman watches both cells through a two-way mirror in his control room. Back to William. He remembers when he held a party at the Homeward Bound clinic and met John for the first time. John isn't a fan of William's probability formula. It looks at how much money his company will take in over the course of the person's life and subtracts the likelihood they'll get sick and how much that'll cost the company. If this is a positive number and they can make money, they may cover the person. William chooses who lives or dies, which of course is not something that John likes. He wants people to make their own choice. John also feels that William's probability formula ignores what he's been testing all along, the will to survive. You can't actually know if someone has this until they've seen death up close. While William is walking to his next test, we find out that he's inside an abandoned zoo building. By one of the exhibits, he needs to grab two chains with pull handles on their ends. This is one of the creepiest moments in the whole series to me. Behind the glass inside the exhibit, a light turns on to reveal that Billy the puppet is on a platform with a noose around the neck. The platform immediately drops, which makes the puppet swing forward and smack into the glass right in front of William. It's an effective jump scare. While hanging from the noose, the puppet's mouth moves and explains the rules of the test. Billy appearances have been grand and theatrical before, like the puppet riding out on a tricycle in Saw 2 when the SWAT team first enters the building. But this one's my favorite, and it's unnerving. The test is that William gets to choose which one of two people to save. His choices are Addie, the secretary, who's older and is at risk for diabetes, but has a family, and the other is Alan, the file clerk, who's younger and healthier but doesn't have a family. Jigsaw wants William to choose if he will use his probability formula and save Alan, or if he ignores it and saves Addie because her family will miss her. Not only is this sadistic, it's also clever, which is what these movies are at their best. Addie and Alan are on platforms with barbed wire around their necks. William lets go of Alan's chain, killing him and saving Addie. Pamela finally plays the tape recorder in her cell. Jigsaw isn't happy about her sensationalism and how she's written about John's message. Hoffman gets a call from Erickson, and he goes in because they have the Seth Baxter tape. Meanwhile, Jill goes to the hospital, and she has the bubble mailer package she got from the box that John left her. She slides it into a slot on a door. There's a flashback here of the crew setting up the rack from Saw 3. Amanda and Hoffman don't get along, and Hoffman implies that Amanda won't be around for long. Jill shows up to see John and asks him to stop doing the tests. He tells her that he'll give her a way out and then hands her a key, which is the one that opened the box he left her. Back to William. He remembers a meeting he had with John at his office. William denied John's request for an experimental cancer treatment from a Norwegian doctor. John brought in some supplemental reading material about the program to help him convince William, and he was sure it would work too. John walks around the room and gives a speech about how healthcare decisions are made by the health insurance companies. The soundtrack music swells and dies, and then John says, "Piranha," and you think he's looking at William. We cut back to William saying, "John," and he closes his eyes and pinches the bridge of his nose. And then in a shot straight out of Hot Fuzz, the movie cuts back to John from a different angle that shows John is actually looking at William's fish tank, and he laughs to himself with a smile on his face. It's great. Next up for William is a boiler room. He's up on the catwalk and Debbie the lawyer is below. William has to help her navigate through a steam maze in 90 seconds and get a key before a device kills her. When she gets to the end and climbs a ladder, she sees an x-ray of a key inside an abdomen, a picture of William in the vise, and another picture of the stitches on William's side. She grabs a saw and tries to cut the key out of William, but they struggle until time runs out and she dies. William leaves and grabs another bomb key. Hoffman arrives to meet Erickson and Perez. He asks about Seth's tape, and Perez tells him that the voice on the tape was altered and wasn't John's voice. They drive to an audio technician's lab where their best decrypt keeper is on the job, trying to crack the code and figure out what the original voice sounds like. Jill is back at her place, and we find out she didn't give Hoffman all the envelopes. She grabs the number 6 envelope out of the box as well as some other things, and gets in her car. William approaches a door with a swirl on it, and he hears multiple voices coming from inside. It's the dog pit. The 6 dog pit members are restrained on a spinning merry-go-round inside a cage. Since there's 6 loud dogs tied up behind bars, I think it's safe to call it a merry-go bound hound sound pound. There's a shotgun pointed at them, and the carousel will stop 6 times, once for each person, and the gun will fire 6 times no matter what. William has a chance to save 2 people. He can stick his hand into a device and it will pierce his hand and make the gun point upwards and fire into the air instead of shooting a person. The scene is very chaotic with lots of screaming while everyone's trying to convince William that they should be saved. And it descends into them carouseling out and bad-mouthing the others. And then even more screaming whenever someone dies. It's uncomfortable and disturbing. He saves 2 women and then he enters the zoo maintenance area and grabs the key for the last bomb. Hoffman, Erickson, and Perez arrive at the audio tech lab. The tech says that the person on the tape had access to high-end audio programs to sound just like Jigsaw. That's all the explanation I need. I'm happy. While the tech is still hard at work adjusting the audio on the tape, Hoffman gets a coffee. Perez says she still has doubts about Strom being Jigsaw's accomplice, and Erickson says that Strom's fingerprints revealed he's no longer alive. At that moment, the tech finds the sweet spot in the adjustments, and we hear Hoffman's voice on the tape's audio. Hoffman cuts Erickson's throat and throws his hot coffee in Perez's face. God damn it, leave her face alone, it's been through enough already. And to make it worse, the coffee on her face yelled at her and said, "What the fuck? You should be more careful and get out of my way next time. I'm not your parent or babysitter, but I should ground you like I got grounded." It was scolding hot coffee. After that, Hoffman jams a screwdriver into a surge protector strip, speaking of being grounded, and knocks out the electricity. He then grabs the tech and uses her as a shield from Perez's bullets. Hoffman gets up close and stabs Perez multiple times. This is a very hectic scene of carnage. Hoffman hustles to his car's trunk, grabs Strom's hand from an ice cooler, and uses the fingerprints on the gun, the screwdriver, and the wall, even though they just told him that doesn't work using a dead person's prints. Hoffman pours gasoline all over the bodies, including Erickson, who's still alive. Then he lights the fire and leaves. You can overhear the coffee saying, "I hope the ends justify the beans, Hoffman," in the background before screaming bubbly murder. Jill arrives at Hoffman's control room at the zoo. She puts her bag in a locker and leaves the note Pamela gave her on the computer keyboard. Hoffman returns and sees the paper. It's a photocopy of a letter that he wrote in Saw 4 and Amanda read in Saw 3. The note says Hoffman knows that Amanda was with Cecil when he robbed the clinic and inadvertently caused Jill to lose her unborn child Gideon. Hoffman then tells Amanda that she needs to kill Lynn or else he'll tell John what happened. He sits down and Jill comes in and uses a remote that shocks Hoffman with equipment she hooked up to the bottom of the chair. William follows arrows directing him to his family, and he ends up in a cage inside a room just before the 60-minute timer runs out. 2 doors slide open to reveal he's between Tara and Brent on one side and Pamela on the other. He asks the mother and son what they're doing there, and Pamela calls out William's name. He walks over to Pamela, who it turns out is his sister. Tara and Brent are Harold Abbott's wife and son. William terminated Harold's policy at the beginning of the movie, and Harold died as a result. A video starts to play and John apologizes to Tara and Brent. He gives them the opportunity to let William live or to kill him, and that's what the lever was for all along. William realizes that he's just part of someone else's game. After she straps Hoffman to the chair, Jill pulls a reverse bear trap out of her bag. It's a more compact design than the one Amanda had in her test. She puts it on Hoffman's head because his picture was in the number 6 envelope. Tara wants to pull the lever, but she can't go through with it. Right off the Abbott, Brent walks over and pulls it for her. A device that has many syringes on it swings down and stabs William in the back. It pumps the hydrofluoric acid into William. He melts and the lower half of his body falls to the floor. Right off the splat, his insides spill out. And it's very important to remember that this is how Pamela is spending her birthday. Hoffman's reverse bear trap also starts. Jill gets to deliver the game over line and slams the door. He breaks one of his hands to slide it out of the strap and undo the other one. He frantically searches for anything to free himself from the trap. The door to the room has a glass window with horizontal bars on the inside. Right before the timer runs out, He shoves the trap between two bars, which also breaks the glass. The trap rips open slightly, but the bars stop it from going any further. He gets out and there's a huge piece of his cheek dangling from the side of his face. He screams, and the end credits start. I guess the movie kinda ends with Tara, Brent, and Pamela locked in a room with a corpse, since they haven't gotten out yet. I really like Saw 6. It's a step up from Saw 5, and I would even put it a little higher than Saw 4. It's got a lot of interesting twists, and even social commentary about healthcare and insurance. I'm giving Saw 6 a 7 out of 10. If you skipped ahead because you're eager to hear me talk about Saw 7, hello. You may have missed some setups for jokes. I guess they didn't want to be accused of ripping off David Fincher again because they didn't officially call the movie Saw 7. It was released as Saw 3D, and it was later retitled Saw the Final Chapter on home video. I always thought this was the weakest film of the original 7 movies in the series, but I wasn't dreading rewatching it. The movie has the same director and writers as Saw 6, so let's go. It begins with a flashback to the ending of Saw 1. After that, we see Dr. Lawrence Gordon crawling along the halls after he's cut off his foot and escaped from the bathroom. He has somewhere Elwes to be. Intercut with this is a descent down a CGI drain with the opening credits flying into your face. It's nice to see Cary Elwes back. When I first mentioned him in my Saw 1 discussion, I said that Black Christmas 2019 was the best one, and I should probably clarify what I mean by that. By that, I mean it's my favorite of the 3 iterations of Black Christmas. Saw 7 shifts to the exterior of a building in the park during the day with a crowd of people looking into its windows. Inside is a table with 2 unconscious men, Ryan and Brad, on opposite sides. Each has a table saw in front of him, and there's another saw in the middle of the table. The 2 guys wake up one after the other. I'm going to recite their back and forth dialogue. What the fuck is this? What the fuck are you doing here? What the fuck are you doing here? I'm fucking stuck. Yeah, me too. What the fuck? The acting isn't good, and this moment feels like a parody, but hey, I really enjoyed it. They ask the people outside for help, and the camera pans up to reveal a device on the ceiling that's covered by a sheet. The sheet falls, revealing a woman who is hidden above it. Her name is Dina, and she knows the guys. Billy the puppet rides out on a tricycle to tell them about the game. Ryan and Brad are in love with Dina, and she uses both of them and gets them to do illegal things for her. The puppet calls it a love triangle and says one of them has to die. Billy finishes talking. Ryan off the Brad, the 3 table saws start, and the device starts to lower Dina into the saw in the middle. The 3 saws are all connected, and the line can slide back and forth. To save Dina, it must be pushed entirely to one side and kill one of the men. There's a nice overhead shot of the middle saw spinning that's from Dina's POV. This was done for the 3D, but I actually really like it. This shot repeats a few times throughout the scene. The 2 men fight back and forth, and Brad's chest gets cut when his saw is pushed too far in his direction. Dina changes who she roots for to win and tells them both she loves them. Eventually, Brad and Ryan see through it and keep the line of saws in the middle, so Dina is killed. Blood splatters everywhere, including on Billy the puppet and a mannequin, which makes me laugh despite it being so horrible this is happening. After the title, we see the final moments of the last movie. Jill watches outside the control room. Hoffman escapes from the reverse bear trap, and she runs away and hides. Hoffman leaves immediately without a word, taking the trap with him. He doesn't even say 1, 2, skip a few 99, 100 like a normal person before he looks for Jill. He doesn't find her, but patches himself up and then goes to a hideout and stitches up his face like this is Pan's Labyrinth. Jill goes to the police department and asks to talk to Matt Gibson from Internal Affairs. I really like this character. The way he delivers his lines is amusing and adds some life to the movie. Jill wants immunity and protection because she's afraid of Hoffman, and she offers to tell him everything. Gibson is immediately interested because he knows Hoffman. At a TV studio, we meet Bobby Dagan, played by Sean Patrick Flannery. He's being interviewed for a talk show because he was in a jigsaw trap and published a book called Survive, My Story of Overcoming Jigsaw, with the word survive being a long-ass acronym. The host compliments him on his popularity and praise he's gotten across the country, and Bobby talks about being drowned in Sean Patrick flattery. The host asks Bobby about being tested by Jigsaw. Right off the bat, Bobby starts saying the most banal things about his life-changing experience and how he thought he was going to die, realized he hadn't done anything with his life and then decided to live, was reborn, and that this is now his life. More like, tried off the bat. He stuck hooks into his pectoral muscles and then pulled himself up to a platform using chains attached to the hooks. After the interview, Bobby meets with 4 other people: his wife Joyce, his publicist Nina, his lawyer Suzanne, and his friend Kale. That night, Jill has a ridiculous nightmare where she's kidnapped and wakes up tied up and standing in between 2 rails on supports that are about as high as her waist. In front of her at the end of the track is Hoffman, with an adorable little car that has a blade on the front. Hoffman starts the train and it goes racing down the track and hits Jill in the stomach, completely ripping her body into multiple pieces. It's so over the top that it becomes surreal. To make up for that last sequence not being real, the movie goes right into another trap, which is one of the best scenes. Evan wakes up behind the wheel of a car with his back glued to the seat. An 8-track tape slides itself into place and starts playing Jigsaw's message, which is that Evan and his friends are racists. And what do you know? These friends are also there too as part of the trap. Since Evan's the leader of the group, he determines if they live or die. He has 30 seconds to rip free of the seat to which he's glued and reach forward to pull a lever. The back of the car is lifted up with jacks, and it has rear-wheel drive and starts accelerating. Thankfully, Evan doesn't make it because what happens when time runs out is that the car gets up to about 70 miles per hour. The jacks fall, crushing his girlfriend's head who's underneath one of the back tires, and then running over the rest of her body. When the car moves forward, it also pulls the chains from one of his friends who's held in place behind the car, ripping off his arms and jaw. One of his other friends is chained to the garage door in front of the car, and the car hits him and breaks through the door. This all reminds me of a particular scene from Quentin Tarantino's movie, Death Proof. Evan rides in the car as it continues to speed forward outside in a junkyard until it crashes head-on with another parked car. And the impact of this completely tears the skin right off the back, launching his body forward through the car's windshield. He flies and then crash lands through the other car's windshield. This burst of violence is so convoluted and absurd that it's hard to take it seriously, and also feels like a parody. It's not a bad thing to have some fun in scenes like this and the previous dream sequence. The next day, Bobby goes to a Jigsaw survivors meeting. A woman tells her story, and we see some of it in a flashback. She needs to kill her abusive boyfriend to pass her test, which she's actually grateful for. And there's a cutaway shot of some garden gnomes, which reminds me of the movie Dark Knight of the Scarecrow. The difference in Saw 7 is that blood sprays on the gnomes, just like Billy and the mannequin earlier. I guess no inanimate humanoid objects are safe in this movie. Also in the group are a couple familiar faces, Addie and Simone from Saw 6. Simone still has a much more cynical attitude about being tested, which is realistic. Jigsaw's traps are divisive. Bobby does more of his motivational speaking for the camera crew he brought along with him, and he shows his scars on his chest and calls them a badge of courage. Then he asks his wife Joyce to come kiss him as a PR move. This causes someone to applaud them off-screen. It's Dr. Lawrence Gordon, who's sitting next to the snack table, like 20 feet away from the rest of the support group's circle. He walks over and calls Bobby out on how he's filming the meeting and using them for his own gain. In the parking lot, Bobby is kidnapped by someone in a pig mask. Gibson goes to check out what happened at the junkyard. Inside the bathroom, the words "Gibson, see for yourself" are written in blood on the bathroom mirror. Thankfully, the other cop named Rogers tells Gibson that Hoffman left the message and lets him read it himself, instead of just reading it out loud without context, like Carey, Hoffman, or Strom would have done. On the floor is the reverse bear trap that Jill used on Hoffman. Bobby wakes up in a giant bird cage like he's a Sean Patrick canary. A jigsaw tape starts, revealing that Bobby is a fraud who's never been tested before. Bobby needs to go through a series of tests to ultimately save his wife, Joyce. Fortunately, Jigsaw didn't cut 30 minutes from the previous time limit again, so Bobby has 60 minutes, the same as William got. Bobby gets out of the cage, and there's a flashback where Cale and Bobby see a Jigsaw survivor on the news, and Cale gets the idea that someone could profit from sharing what that experience is like. Back in the present, Bobby ascends some stairs and goes through a door that both have his words painted on them. These messages are self-help phrases like, verify your self-worth through commitment, that are made up of Sean Patrick flowery language. When taken together, the first letters of these phrases form the acronym SURVIVE, which is the title of his book. Showing Bobby these words is a good way to taunt him. At the safe house, Gibson shows Jill the reverse bear trap and tells her they found her fingerprints on it. Hoffman sends a DVD to them and he wants Jill. In exchange, he'll stop the game and not kill everyone. There's a small explosion at the junkyard and then another larger one. Gibson moves Jill to a cell at the SFPD. Bobby finds his publicist Nina in a trap. She has a string down her throat with a fishhook on the end attached to a key. Bobby has 1 minute to pull it out and free her before some spikes pierce her throat. If that's not enough, she also has to keep quiet during all of this because she helped spread Bobby's story knowing it was a lie. There's a device measuring the sound levels, and too much noise will make the spikes move faster. He gets the key and then runs out of time before he can unlock the device, and she dies. He screams at her corpse and tells her that she just needed to shut up. That's not very Sean Patrick mannerly of him. Then there's a flashback of John meeting Bobby at a book signing. John's looking pretty cool with his baseball cap turned around 180 degrees. Right off the backwards hat, he starts taunting Bobby for lying. Again, it's always great seeing Tobin Bell. Next up, Bobby has to try to save his lawyer Suzanne. She's in a device that slowly pushes her face into spikes that stab her eyes and mouth. He needs to go over to a modified piece of exercise equipment and lift up a bar, but doing so causes a spike to protrude and stab him in the side. Whenever the bar is raised, it stops Suzanne's device, so Bobby needs to hold it up long enough that Suzanne won't reach the spikes before her timer runs out. There are multiple POV shots of Suzanne's spikes approaching the camera. Much like the shot of the table saw in the movie's first trap, this is used to have something jump out at you in 3D, but it's a really memorable, creepy image in 2D. He comes close but again can't save her. Hoffman sends Gibson another video and he immediately picks up on a clue and heads out. Bobby finds his friend Cale on the opposite side of a room with most of its floor missing. Cale's eyes are covered and he's wearing a noose. Within the time limit, Bobby needs to guide Cale across the wooden boards and concrete supports to a key in the middle of the room. There's some nice suspense when Cale knocks off a bottle that was on one of the boards, and then when he breaks one of the boards and avoids falling by grabbing onto another one. Bobby makes his way across and grabs the key and throws it to Cale, but Cale drops it and then dies when the time runs out. Gibson and Rogers arrive at the place where Hoffman filmed the video. It's the same location where in the past, when Gibson was a uniformed cop, a man attacked him and stole his gun. The man was going to shoot Gibson, but Hoffman arrived and got the man to drop the gun. Hoffman then shot the unarmed man 3 times in the back. Gibson reported Hoffman, but Hoffman got a promotion. Gibson moved to internal affairs a year later and took down a few people working under Hoffman. Hoffman got pissed and swore revenge. Gibson pieces together Hoffman's clues about where Bobby is being tested. The SWAT team enters the building and starts finding the traps. Gibson returns to the junkyard when he finds out that Hoffman's video was actually sent from there. After Bobby removes a couple of his teeth to find a combination to open a door, he makes it to his wife Joyce, who's chained up on a platform surrounded by an electrified fence. She doesn't know that Bobby lied about being tested before. What he needs to do for his final test is live out the lie he told. He must stick hooks into his pecs and pull himself up chains, and use both of his free hands to plug one extension cord into another at the top. Meanwhile, at the junkyard, there's a room behind the bathroom mirror. Inside is a corpse from the car trap. Gibson remembers seeing this corpse in a body bag earlier. When Hoffman set off the explosion as a distraction, he snuck in and removed the body and got in the bag himself. On a monitor in the room, Gibson sees the medical examiner Dr. Hefner rolling in a body at the police station's morgue. Gibson calls to warn everyone to get out of the station. Right then, a machine gun pops up in the corner of the room and fatally shoots Gibson and the other officers. Back at the morgue, Dr. Hefner approaches and unzips the human remains pouch. Right off the body bag, Hoffman lunges forward and stabs Hefner in the neck. He then gets out and goes on a rampage. At the test site, the SWAT team gets locked in a room and killed by poisonous gas. Hoffman makes his way to Rogers and shoots him through a two-way mirror. Then he enters the room and opens Jill's cell. She gets away by stabbing him in the neck with something, and he chases after her. Intercut with this, Bobby stabs the hooks into his chest and pulls himself up to the top. He reaches up and grabs the extension cords. And in an amazing moment of dark comedy, the hooks rip through his chest and he falls to the ground. His pecs couldn't actually hold his body weight. The timer runs out and Bobby watches Joyce burn to death. Jill hides in an evidence room that contains some of the old traps. Hoffman enters and finds Jill. He knocks her out, straps her to a chair, and then goes to look at the traps on the shelves. He eyes the more compact reverse bear trap that she used on him for a second, before he notices that the older model that Amanda wore in the first movie is also there. He grabs it and puts it on Jill and starts the timer as she wakes up. After 7 movies, we finally get to see the reverse bear trap go off as intended. And holy fuck, it's so much more gruesome than I imagined it would be. Hoffman says game over and closes the door. He returns to his hideout, but he's ambushed by 3 people wearing pig masks. One of them stabs him in the neck with a syringe and then lifts off the mask, revealing that it's Dr. Lawrence Gordon. Hoffman is appropriately confused. It turns out in the last movie when Jill delivered a package to the hospital, it was a tape John recorded for Gordon. After Gordon escaped the bathroom, John helped him back to health, and Gordon has been helping Jigsaw out all along, like telling him about Lynn and putting the key in Mike's eye, as well as sewing the guy's eyes in the mausoleum trap. He even wrote the "I know who you are" note to Hoffman. And that one was the worst thing. On the tape, John asks Gordon to do something if anything happens to Jill. And in exchange, John will tell Gordon everything, including where the bathroom is. And Gordon says to the screen, "Dude, there's a bathroom right..." Oh. Hoffman wakes up in the bathroom with his ankle chained to a pipe next to Adam's skeleton. He tries to grab a saw on the ground, but Gordon walks over and uses his cane to pull it away. Then he picks it up and throws it towards the camera in an awesomely gimmicky 3D shot. Gordon sees his own rotted, severed foot on the floor before he turns off the lights, says game over, and slams the door shut. Which means, once again, a movie ends with a person being locked in a room with at least one corpse. I like this ending, even if it is kinda ridiculous. And I should probably elaborate further on what I meant when I said that Black Christmas 2019 is my favorite iteration of Black Christmas. The original is good, the 2006 remake is alright and has some fun moments. But the 2019 version has a few good ideas, and I'll give it credit for having something to say. The movie just isn't executed very well. However, I would consider it so bad it's good. The incompetently done horror scenes are hilarious, as is the ending that differs quite a bit from the originals and the first remake's endings. I was just so entertained watching Black Christmas 2019. For that reason, it's my favorite. That explanation was for people who stopped watching in the first Saw video and will never hear it. So, enough of that. On this rewatch of Saw 7, I noticed that there's some really clever foreshadowing during the Jigsaw Survivors support group scene where Bobby says that his scars are a badge of courage. This is a literary allusion to the Stephen Crane novel The Red Badge of Courage. I've never read the book, but I have seen the 1951 movie adaptation directed by John Huston. The story takes place during the American Civil War. The main character is a young Union soldier named Henry. In the middle of a battle, he runs away. Afterwards, when he sees some injured soldiers, he gets jealous and wants his own battle wound, aka a red badge of courage. Henry sees some other people running from something and asks one of them what's going on, and the man hits Henry in the head with his rifle. When someone finds him later, Henry lies and says he got shot in the head. Afterwards, he becomes more confident and proves he's not a coward. The flag bearer gets shot. Right off the battle, Henry takes the flag and leads the way during the charges. He makes it through the battle without getting injured. In Saw 7, Bobby lies about the origin of his injury. He either gave himself the scars or had someone else do it for him. Unlike Henry, who never got a real red badge of courage but proved he wasn't a coward, Bobby needs a little help from Jigsaw on that front. Overall, I was pleasantly surprised by how much I enjoyed rewatching Saw 7, and I prefer it slightly to Saw 5 now. The movie is fast-paced, entertaining, features Gibson, and has a satisfying ending where I'm interested in what happens next. It's good, just not the best the series has to offer. I'm giving Saw 7 a 6 out of 10. Thank you for watching. I will return for part 4 of this video series.